Did you know that a lost chapter of the Gospel of Matthew was found after more than 1,750 years? That's right, a text that has been hidden for almost 2 millennia is now available to us, revealing surprising details about the teachings of Jesus and the early Christians. But what does this lost chapter say? Does it bring new revelations, or does it just reinforce what we already know? What makes this discovery so significant for the history of the Bible and the Christian faith? Before continuing, I'll give you a quick message. Want a chance to win our book, Achieve Abundance with God's Blessing? Then subscribe to the Cantos Divinos channel and participate in our weekly draw exclusive to subscribers. To compete, simply be registered and like the video. Sign up now and good luck! To understand the importance of discovering the lost chapter of Matthew, it is essential to first understand the historical context and meaning of the Gospels. The Gospel of Matthew, written by one of Jesus' apostles, is one of the fundamental pillars of the New Testament. Its main characteristic is to present Jesus as the Messiah promised in the Old Testament prophecies. Matthew is dedicated to showing Jesus' royal lineage, his birth, his teachings, and especially how he fulfills the promises made to Israel. This makes the Gospel have a very strong connection with Jewish traditions, while pointing to the universality of Christ's message. Now imagine that in the midst of all this context, a chapter which had been lost for more than 1,750 years suddenly appears. A chapter that could change or add a new layer to the story we know so well. But before we talk about the impact of this discovery, we need to reflect on the complex process of formation of the Bible. We know that during the first centuries, there were several versions of the Gospels, and sometimes different Christian sects had their own sacred texts. The formation of the biblical canon was a careful process, and in many cases, decisions about which books would be included were made by religious leaders of the time. Some texts were rejected, others set aside, and others, like the Matthew chapter, apparently fell into oblivion. Why was a chapter of Matthew lost for so long? Could it be a copying error? Or perhaps an intentional choice to preserve certain teachings while others were marginalized? The Gospel of Matthew, for example, is known for being one of the most complete in the account of Jesus' teachings, with his famous words about the Sermon on the Mount and the parables. However, the lost chapter now reveals something more, something that was perhaps deliberately hidden or simply lost in history. The fact that this chapter remained hidden for so long raises many questions. Were religious authorities afraid of what he might reveal? Or was it somehow lost due to wars, invasions, and other crises that affected the first Christian communities? Regardless of the reason, this discovery makes us rethink not only the history of the Bible, but also how ancient texts may have been shaped and changed over time, so that we can better understand Jesus' legacy. Now imagine the thrill and impact of finding something that completes a fragment of our Christian story, something we might never have expected to see again. This lost chapter of Matthew has the power to not only connect us more deeply with the past, but also to offer us a new perspective on the meaning of Christ's word. The discovery of the lost chapter of the Gospel of Matthew is, without a doubt, one of the most intriguing and surprising revelations of recent times. What seemed to be a mere fragment of history became a key that opens new doors to more deeply understand sacred texts. But how, after all, was this chapter found after more than 1,750 years of mystery? Let's understand what happened. The discovery occurred in a remote region in Asia Minor, where archaeologists were working in an ancient monastery. While restoring ancient documents, a mysterious manuscript appeared among the deteriorated papers. At first, it seemed like a simple 4th century text, with no major relevance. However, upon analyzing further, scholars realized that something was different. The writing style and fragments of the content indicated that it was a much older text, possibly dating back to the first centuries of Christianity. It was not a simple apocryphal or an already known gospel. It was a lost chapter of Matthew. After discovery, a thorough authentication process began. Like any significant archaeological find, verifying authenticity is crucial to ensure it is not a hoax. Experts in paleography, the science that studies ancient writing, were called in to study the manuscript. The material used in the parchment, the ink used, and even the handwriting were analyzed, confirming that the document actually dated from the period of the Roman Empire, specifically the 2nd or 3rd century. This confirmed that, in fact, the text found could be genuine and belonged to the Gospel of Matthew. The next step was to examine the content itself. This manuscript contained a complete chapter, previously unknown, with teachings and narratives that were absent in traditional versions of the Gospel. By comparing it with other ancient Christian texts, scholars realized that the content was not only consistent with Matthew's theology, but also provided new insights into the life and teachings of Jesus. One of the most intriguing points was the way in which this chapter approached Jesus' relationship with the religious authorities of the time. revealing unprecedented details about dialogues and confrontations that had not been documented until then. However, what really surprised researchers was the way the chapter fit into the context of the Gospel of Matthew narrative. Although the other Gospels talked about the main events in the life of Jesus, this lost chapter had a special focus on Jesus' interaction with the disciples and the Gentiles, highlighting Christ's teaching in a more personal and intimate way. It included stories that seemed to be adaptations of already known parables, but with a more direct and deeper tone, addressing themes such as faith, mercy, and forgiveness in a more comprehensive way. With authentication confirmed and the content transcribed, the chapter was revealed to the public, and the reaction was immediate. Religions and theologians began to analyze the text, debating what it could mean for Christian doctrines and the impact it could have on the understanding of early Christianity. After all, this chapter could provide a broader and richer view of Jesus' words and deeds, which makes his discovery even more fascinating. But despite the excitement over the discovery, many questions still remain. Why was this chapter lost in the first place? Had it been deliberately excluded? Or was it just the result of centuries of carelessness, war, and destruction? Many wonder, what else could be hiding in the shadows of history, waiting to be discovered? These questions are still being investigated, and we may never know the definitive answers. But one thing is certain, the discovery of this lost chapter not only opened a window into the past, but also makes us question how history often holds more secrets than we are willing to admit. At the end of this entire process, the feeling is clear. The Gospel of Matthew will never be the same. And perhaps with this discovery, we can begin to understand even more the depth of Jesus' message, which continued to be transmitted in ways we never imagined. What exactly does this chapter bring? What was kept hidden in it for so long, and how does it fit into the Gospel of Matthew? The lost chapter begins with an introduction that connects directly to Jesus' most central teachings. In it, Jesus addresses his disciples in a more profound way, explaining more clearly the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. One of the first things that catches attention is Jesus' emphasis on how true faith transcends blind obedience to laws. He says, "He who loves with his heart, even without following the rules, finds the kingdom of God within himself." This statement is impressive, as it reminds us that, for Jesus, love and genuine faith were more important than mere observance of rules. A revolutionary message, which certainly caused controversy at the time, and still today provokes reflection on the relationship between divine grace and human works. Another interesting point about this lost chapter is how it explores the idea of forgiveness. The text features an unprecedented episode where Jesus is approached by a repentant man who asks for forgiveness for a terrible sin. Jesus, instead of condemning him, responds with a parable about the love of God, which is capable of forgiving even the greatest sins. He teaches his disciples, if God can forgive great trespasses, why should we not forgive one another small trespasses? This lesson on forgiveness is profound and direct, reinforcing the theme of divine mercy that runs throughout the New Testament. The chapter also gives us a more personal view of Jesus. While the traditional Gospels focus mainly on miracles and parables, this chapter reveals more intimate moments in the life of Jesus. He appears retreating to a quiet place where he prayed alone for long hours. This prayer practice is described as essential to strengthening his mission, something that has never been detailed so vividly in other Gospels. The emphasis on personal prayer, in this context, highlights the humanity of Jesus and his constant connection with God, something that serves as an example for all of us. Furthermore, the lost chapter also features an episode that challenges us to reflect on relationships within the Christian community. In a scene where Jesus speaks directly about the challenges of community life, he says, "Where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there will be my spirit, but there will also be difficulties, disputes, and temptations. Overcome them with love and humility." This teaching reinforces the idea that unity within the church is not something that arises automatically, but is something that requires effort, sacrifice, and above all, the example of Christ. However, what draws the most attention in the content of the lost chapter is Jesus' dialogue with the Pharisees. While the traditional Gospels focus on some discussions with religious leaders, this chapter reveals an even more direct and harsh confrontation. The Pharisees question Jesus about the validity of his words and accuse him of disrespecting the laws of Moses. Jesus wisely responds, "I am not against the laws, but I am against those who use them as a shield to hide what is in their hearts." This confrontation reveals a severe criticism of religious hypocrisy and challenges us to reflect on our own attitudes towards laws and spiritual principles. One of the most surprising elements of the lost chapter is the reference to Gentiles, something that is not so common in the Gospel of Matthew. Here Jesus makes a bold statement when he says, "The Gentiles, those who do not yet know my words, are also children of God, and they will come from all nations to hear the truth." This speech suggests that, from the first moments of his ministry, Jesus already envisioned a universal message, which was not limited to the Jewish people, but which expanded to all people on earth. This more inclusive and global vision is one of the keys to understanding the breadth of Jesus' mission, which transcends ethnic and cultural borders. Throughout this chapter, we see how the evangelist Matthew, by documenting these teachings, brings to light a closer and more accessible facet of Jesus, with messages that speak directly to the hearts of Christians of all times. The rich detail and depth of the teachings contained in this lost chapter have the power to transform our understanding of the Gospels and help us apply these teachings more effectively in our daily lives. This discovery is more than an addition to the biblical canon. It is a window into the thoughts of Jesus which, although already known in many aspects, reveals itself to be even more profound and challenging when we look at it in more detail. And so, what once seemed like a simple part of Matthew's Gospel becomes an invitation to rethink our faith, our values, and our commitment to the message of Christ. The discovery of the lost chapter of the Gospel of Matthew is not only a fascinating archaeological event, but it also has profound implications for Christian history and faith. This new chapter, by shedding light on previously unseen teachings of Jesus, challenges traditional interpretations and offers new understanding of his message and mission. But the impact of this discovery goes beyond the academic field. It reverberates in the beliefs and practices of Christians around the world. As much as the discovery was celebrated by many as a great victory for scholars in the Christian faith, it also generated a set of mysteries and questions that cannot be ignored. And, as happens with every great historical discovery, theories have emerged that seek to explain why this chapter remained hidden for so long. See how beautiful it is to spread the word of the Lord. For those of you who are interested in biblical curiosities and wisdom, we leave here one of our most impactful videos. See the letter in which Joseph of Arimathea describes Jesus perfectly. This is the letter that the world needs to know, and you will be impacted by it. Click and follow. Thank you once again for your attention, and may you remain under God's grace. See you soon.